Hi everyone, I hope you're doing all great. Welcome back to my channel. I'm Birgit from Probasiani. And I hope you are ready for a new creative project, which is my dress/t-shirt pattern Emma, which I'm wearing here now as a dress. Emma has a tight fit on the body. It has a collar, which is in one piece, and it has slightly dropped shoulders. You can sew Emma as a dress with this length here, but of course also, as mentioned, as a t-shirt like this here with long sleeves or short sleeves. Or you can make a quick pattern hack like this here, so that Emma becomes a short boxy pullover. Of course you can wear Emma by itself, but I think it's the perfect piece for layering outfits or to make your summer tops or dresses a bit more suitable for the colder season. The Emma pattern is available in all my shops, which are on different creative platforms. The link you will find below this video here. The detailed written sewing instruction with photos and the pattern is available in 3 languages: English, French and German. Emma is really a quick project and very simple to sew, so this is also the perfect project when you are a beginner at the overlock sewing machine. So get yourself a pattern, grab your fabric, and let's go, have fun! Before you start now cutting into your fabric from the stash or before you are shopping for a fabric, let's check what the requirements for the fabrics are, because I think you can already imagine that the fabric has to have some amount of elasticity, so otherwise you won't get into the collar. Among the download files you will find this graph here to check the elasticity of a fabric. To do so, please cut a 10 by 10 cm square out of your fabric. Then you put the fabric square onto the graph with the direction of the fabric width this way here and the direction of the fabric length on this side here. This is also the direction of the grain line or the direction of the tiny stitches of the jersey fabric. Then you hold the fabric on the left side with your finger and pull it to the right side with the other hand. You shouldn't do this with all your forces, just how much it is possible without any special effort. Then you can check on the right side to which percentage you could pull the fabric. My example here is a cotton elastan with 95% cotton, 5% elastan, and I could pull it to about 125%. The next fabric sample I'm showing you here is a rib fabric. The rib I can pull up to about 135%. The next fabric sample is a viscose elastan, which has a similar elasticity as the rib. I could pull this one also up to 135 or 140%. The next fabric is quite different to the others. It's not a t-shirt jersey fabric, it's more like a knit fabric, but it's also quite elastic. I could pull this up to around 125% too. All these fabrics are suitable for Emma. They are knitted or jersey fabrics. You can pull them up to around 125% and they bounce back to their original shape afterwards. This, by the way, was also a cotton elastan. For thicker elastic fabrics, please check out the pattern adaptations. Here is an example of a fabric which would not pass this test. It's a cotton polyester winter sweat fabric. And as you can see it here, it has only an elasticity of 110%. So this is a no for Emma. So as a summary, we need a knitted or a jersey fabric with a minimum elasticity around 125 or 130%. This chapter, how to prepare the pattern at home, you might also skip if you are more experienced. You only need to know that the layout of the DIN A4 pattern is made so that you can also print it out on US letter size paper. And of course, the pattern has to be printed out in its actual size at 100%, not another scale. Then I spread out all the sheets over my floor. The whole thing works like a huge puzzle, but it's much easier. At each side of the sheets, where you have to glue another sheet later, you will find a number. You only have to bring now the same numbers together. Please note that you don't need all sheets for all sizes and all options. About this, you will find more detailed information in the written sewing instruction. For the video, to show you the whole pattern, I've printed out all sheets. This is how it looks like now. Afterwards, I can bring together the sheets along the dashed lines. There are different methods to do so. I'll just show you my favorite one. For example, here is the dashed line or side number 6. One of the sheets with the number 6 I cut along the dashed line, and the border at the other sheet with the line number 6 I used to put the glue on it. Then I can easily glue the sheets together along the dashed line. And that's it already. I like to work through the pattern until all the horizontal rows are glued together. Afterwards, with the same technique, I'm gluing also the rows together. This is what the Emma pattern looks like now when all the pages are glued together. Let's have a quick closer look. At the top left you will find the control square, which should be as big as indicated. If not, you've used the wrong scale for printing. Then comes the sleeve and the measurement chart. And here the back and front part. The next important topic before we start sewing is how to choose the correct size. Please check the measurement chart in the sewing instruction and choose your size according to your chest width. Perhaps you are lucky and your waist and hip widths are also more or less like in the chart. But if not, don't worry, a pattern adaptation is done very easily. I'll show it to you here on the back part. What you can do now is to hop between the sizes. Let's have a closer look. At the armhole under the arm, you start at that size which you've picked out of the measurement chart. Then let's say your waist width is just between this same size and the next size, so you can draw your new side seam like this here. Then in our example here, the hip is 2 sizes bigger than the chest. So you just continue with a new side seam down to the hip line, aiming to the size which is correct for your hip width. Like this, you've created your personal side seam, which is perfect for your measurements. Of course, these same adaptations have to be made on the front part too. As Emma is a very fitted pattern, you can also consider grading your personal pattern at the waist and hip line to 1 size bigger to have more ease in the garment. Just make sure that your Emma pattern is at your chest really true to your body measurements, otherwise the armhole gets too big. With a full chest you might also need a full bust adjustment in your Emma pattern. There are quite a lot of tutorials for this procedure out on YouTube, but I also might make a video about this topic soon, then you will see it linked here. Depending on the additional width you need in your Emma, you can make an FBA without darts, or for more width, a regular FBA, which means you will add a dart into the side seam. More info about pattern adaptations you'll find in the written sewing instruction. Now we can actually start with the Emma and cut our fabric. I'm showing you here the cutting suggestion which works for most sizes and options. More about this you will find in the written sewing instruction. At first, I fold the selvages in the width of the front and back parts towards the inside of the fabric. Please make sure that the folding lines are parallel to the selvages. I then pin the pattern pieces onto the fabric with the center front and back directly on the folding line. If you have a print like me, please also make sure that the pattern is heading into the right direction. Then this first pattern piece can be cut. By the way, if you make Emma as a dress, the skirt length on the pattern is down to the middle of the knee. If you prefer a skirt length above the knee, you can shorten the skirt by 5 cm. Then follows on the other side of the fabric the back part. Out of the rest of the fabric below the front and back parts, the sleeves can be cut. I fold the fabric in the width of my sleeve so that I can cut a pair of sleeves. Again, if you have a print, please take care of the pattern direction. The sleeve is our third and last pattern piece to be cut. By the way, I'm showing you the step here with a short sleeve, but later on I changed my mind and made a long sleeve for this sewing sample. There's also the possibility to make a boxy sweater out of the Emma pattern. Just few adjustments when cutting are needed. The length is a matter of taste. The best is you start with the original length and then check with a fitting what's best for your body. In my example, I made an extra wide hem with 4 cm width, plus I had to shorten the body by 8 cm to reach the look from the photo. At each side seam in the front and back, I added 4 cm here. Then I linked this point with the armhole with a slight downwards curve. As I wanted to do the sleeve also with the extra wide hem, I added here 2 cm so that I could make the hem 4 cm wide. And to have a wider sleeve, I added here and here on each side 3 cm. This point again I linked in a straight line with this point here under the arm. Now back to the original Emma. As a next step, we will add some marks on our 3 pattern pieces. At the front body, we need to mark the collar fold point, the front sleeve notch and the waistline. Of course, we need these 3 points also on the other side of the front pattern piece. While with woven fabrics, I prefer to cut tiny V's into the fabric to mark the notches. On jersey fabrics, I prefer to work with chalk or like I've did it here with a fabric marker where the color dissolves with water. At the back pattern piece, I mark exactly the same points as on the front pattern piece. Please also mark the back at the wrong fabric side with a cross or something else. On the sleeves, we need to mark the front and back sleeve notch and the shoulder notch. For the next step, we already need one of these notches. Please fold now the collar along the collar fold notches to the inside, means wrong fabric side. Then please iron this folding line. This we do in the front and in the back. Okay, so the next chapter finally brings us to the sewing machine. At first, I put the front and back parts together with their right fabric sides, and at one shoulder and collar, I align the edges exactly and pin these together. As you can see it here, the collar is not folded anymore, but please make sure that the front and back notch of the collar fold are on top of each other. Afterwards, I can close this shoulder and collar seam. The curve where the collar begins is quite steep, so take your time and sew really slowly to master this curve. Of course, the fact that we've pinned before the edges also helps. Then the front and back pattern pieces are unfolded, so that the upper edge at the collar can be casted. Technically, this is not really necessary with jersey fabrics, but it helps a little bit so that the edge doesn't roll in so much. At the collar seam, which we've closed before, please make sure that the seam allowance is put into the back part. Then I carefully press this seam with only the tip of my iron so that the seam allowance is pointing towards the back part. Next, we can close the second shoulder and also the other collar seam. And only to avoid misunderstandings, the collar seam and the shoulder seam are in one piece. I'm not talking about different seams. Again, I sew slowly and carefully at the curve where the collar begins. Afterwards, I'm also ironing the seam towards the back part. At one shoulder and collar seam, there is now at the collar this overlock seam end, which I'm threading now into the overlock seam with a thick needle to secure this end. In the next chapter, we will assemble body and sleeves. The sleeves are now pinned with the right fabric sides facing to the armhole at the body. Here I take care that all the notches are aligning. If the distances on the sleeve and the body aren't really matching, you probably mixed up the sleeves. If you check the armhole, you can see that the distances from the side seam to the sleeve notch is much smaller in the front part than in the back part. This helps when assembling the pieces. Here I pin the pattern pieces together. If you're using pins like me, pin them from the sleeve side, as this will also be the top layer later when sewing. Now the project has some kind of cross shape. As already mentioned, when sewing now the sleeves to the body, I'm sewing with the sleeve layer on top, and at the shoulder seam, I take care that the seam allowance is pointing towards the back part. As here opposite roundings are sewn together, this can be a little bit tricky, so take your time when sewing and put together the edges exactly. Then follows the other sleeve, of course. At this side also, I'm taking care that the shoulder seam is pointing to the back part. Afterwards, I'm pressing the armhole seam allowance towards the sleeve side. Again, as the seam is rounded, I'm working only with the tip of the iron. Otherwise, I would destroy the shape of the garment. As a next step, we're closing the side seams. I'm bringing here the right fabric sides together. And to prepare the seams, as always, I'm aligning the edges and pinning these. By the way, I love always using my pins, but some people prefer these fabric clips for overlock sewing machines. Which one do you like more? Then I close both side seams. The best is you begin these seams at the body hem. Then it's very easy to put the seam allowance at the armhole towards the sleeves. This is also the direction in which we've ironed these seams before. Afterwards, the side seams and sleeve seams are pressed into the back part. Then I hem the t-shirt at the body and the sleeves, of course. To prepare the hem, I'm folding and pressing the hem edges 2 cm towards the wrong fabric side. Then I pin the hem. At all the vertical seams which meet the hem, I'm doing the following trick so that the hem doesn't get too thick. At the hem folding line, I clip the seam allowance almost completely, means right before the outer line of the stitching. Then I can put this small section of here the side seam in the opposite direction of where the rest of the seam is ironed. Like this, the thickness of the seam allowance is better distributed. This I'm doing at both side seams and sleeve seams. Then I continue to prepare the hem. To sew the hem, there are really many possibilities, all depending on your machine options. I'm lucky enough to have a cover stitch sewing machine at home, so I'm using this one for my hems. But of course you can also use your regular household sewing machine by using, for example, a zigzag stitch or using a straight stitch with elastic sewing thread. If you have the possibility, I'd recommend using a Teflon sewing foot here, which glides really very smoothly over your elastic fabric, means there will be less waves later in your garment. But also by choosing the hem stitching, you can also add some personal design to your Emma. Of course, we press everything after sewing. Like this, we can also get rid of the waves in the fabric, or the seam rather. As a last step for Emma, we only need to finish the collar. I'm folding it now to the inside of the garment, exactly at the collar fold notches. And I'm just quickly fixing the collar with some pins. We'll fix now the collar position with bar tacks, but only on the seam allowance here. I now make sure that the position of the seam allowance at the shoulder and collar is correct. That means the seam allowance at the collar and the inside collar facing is in the same direction. Now we can place a bar tack here at the seam allowance to fix both layers. This I'm doing here. I'm sewing with a straight stitch and just about a 1 centimeter long seam. This will hold the collar in place. Just make sure that you only stitch through the seam allowance layers. Of course, you can also make this with a hand stitch. Then follows the second side of the collar. And I'm sewing exactly like before. About a 1 centimeter long seam and only through the seam allowance layers. At last, I'm stitching a label to the inside of the back collar. Like this, I can differentiate easier what's the front and the back part later when wearing the Emma, because Emma looks really very similar on both sides, but the pattern is clearly different. So like this, I don't have to guess and put my Emma on more quickly. Okay, that's it. Your Emma is already ready. I hope you've enjoyed the sewing process and that everything went well. If you have any questions or problems, as always, don't hesitate to contact me. You can write me here below in the comments or an email to info@koba-siani.com. If you want to see more creative content from my side, you can also follow me on social media. I'm mainly on Instagram and Facebook. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to my channel here, so that you don't miss out any creative projects from my side. I hope to see you very soon again to my next video here. Take care until then. Bye!